And people wonder why I'm a libertarian. My hair's messed up. Hi there. My name is Charles Ray Dawson. I'm the Associate Broker Residential Sales Manager of ProStar Realty. This is the Unnamed Real Estate Podcast, episode 284. And I hope you're all having a good day. So, yeah, I need a haircut. I was going to get a haircut today, but instead I decided I needed to get my battery replaced. Or my battery decided I need to get the battery replaced because last night it did not start when I tried to leave the office, and then started fine after I jumped it and drove around a bit. And the thing about Arizona they don't tell people is batteries die horribly here. And in this particular case, I always buy a battery with a 2-year, 3-year, whatever warranty. And it generally dies about 6 months early. Now, this particular battery that I get means if it dies anytime during the warranty, even if it's the last day, they will replace it. So swap in a new battery and we're off to the races for another 2 years, year and a half or so. And I knew it was coming. So I was driving around with those little jumper boxes you can get. It's a lithium battery pack, couple alligator clips, and you can start your car off of those things, and they're awesome. And you really should have at least one in your house and maybe one in each one of your cars, which is why Ross is doing McDonald's this morning. So anyways, I'm trying to figure out exactly how we start this story. I got a lot of stories in my head this morning, listening to a podcast on the way in, and they're just telling like stories of people who rescued people out of a bus that fell into a river, and a Spanish chicken farmer who became the greatest spy of World War II. And I could do an entire podcast just on that guy, but we're not a World War II podcast. There's 50,000 other middle-aged men out there either doing World War II or the Roman Empire. You know, there's an old joke that says when you hit 50, you have to figure out what your middle-aged hobby is going to be. Is it going to be World War II, Roman Empire, or, smoking meats? Well, I can't smoke meat because the wife's allergic to smoked meat. And playing with your meat by yourself is just wrong. World War II I've already done. Like, it's already up here. There's not a lot new for me to learn. Bragging, not bragging. And the Roman Empire, why do we have to live the Roman Empire or study it when we're living it out right now? And that is one of the reasons why we're going to cover the road to nowhere, the 21st century road to nowhere, and how it was supposed to fix the housing crisis. So I love the fact that everything in the world's a crisis now, especially when you're having a politician send you an email about, I want to fix the crisis. And those bad people on the other side of the aisle who are working for special interests don't want to fix the crisis. So please send me money so I can fix the crisis. And then when they actually turn out the bipartisan bill that everybody was crowing about, and then you look at it, there's no there. It's words. Right? And you want Caesar? This is how you get Caesar. Right? So if you have a free weekend, okay, go watch the HBO special Rome. It was a mini series. It was supposed to be like they dropped a season off, so they had to cram like the last season into the last 3 episodes. All right, but it pretty much sort of covers out, hey, this is, why did Caesar wind up becoming Caesar? All right. And it's not necessarily for the reason people think. All right. And because we're looking back, over 2,000 years and through time trying to figure out what exactly was going on at that point. Caesar, Julius, the original Julius Mark I Caesar, he was really having a hard time with his Senate. because the Senate had gotten to the point where basically it was a family thing. It's not like we think of a Senate where any young farm boy out there plowing the fields in Iowa could wind up being a senator. Mr. Smith Goes to Washington is as fake as most porn. But you had to be of the family, you had to be of the social strata, and but there was also the people's body, and there was supposed to be a guy sitting there the entire time who spoke for the peoples, the proletariat, the proles, as I like to call them. And his job was basically sit there when the elites got a little bit too elite-y. He had no other power than veto. People say no. So anyways, we don't have a feature like that. That's supposed to be the House, sort of, kind of, but the House doesn't really do what the House is supposed to do. The Senate's not the Senate is originally envisioned. All right, the Senate was the body of the states, where the individual governors would appoint with due consideration from talking to their individual legislator. Hey, this is Senator Woodruff, and he's going to represent my state. All right, 4, 6, and then at the end of the 6, if we like to keep him, we'll put him back in there for another 6. And it really turned into one of those things where it was for governors just to pay off their buddies, like ambassadorships today. All right, but ultimately it would get replaced if that state suddenly went from one party to the other and that term came up. Well, then somebody else would put in there, as opposed to like now in Maine, where we have Collins, that's a blue state. All right, it's New England, that's a blue state, but she just does such a great job of being a moderate Republican, which pisses off a lot of Republican extremists. She's pretty mid. All right. But for some reason, it's like they've decided, no, she's got an R at the end of her name. So, hey, we got to find somebody to run against them. Hey, grab the Nazi. Yeah, grab the Nazi girlfriend beater. All right, he's salt of the earth. Okay, he's got that common man vibe. He's racist and he beats women. And that's what white men in America want. We got to get those guys back. So... And then they found out that he was a little bit too over the top, and now they're scrambling, trying to figure something out. So this is where we're at in a legislative standpoint. Now, affordability is a huge thing. All right. And one of the things about affordability is housing. And that's how this show suddenly starts talking about this. I mean, it's been 7 minutes and 48 seconds right now, and I've been doing nothing but a big, social sciences class, right? So they called it the 21st Century Road to Housing Act. Something has to be done about housing, and I agree. Right? But like all good legislative bodies, a bunch of sound and fury signifying nothing. Because nobody can waste time and razzle-dazzle you and make you think that they're doing something like a Congress critter. Because, hey, they know I only got to do this for 2 years, mouth the platitudes and stuff like that. And then when I'm up for re-election, because my district is gerrymandered to the point where they're going to vote for me, it's like, you got to vote for me, dude. Otherwise, they win. You don't want them to win. Yeah, I'm banging my secretary. I have $10 million in an offshore account, and there's a little bit of controversy about this, that, and the other thing. But you don't want them to win. Because if they win, it'll be bad. Vote for me. I'm your team. Vote team me. So these guys get together, and hey, it's an election year, so we got to look like we did something and look at the polls. What are people concerned about? They're concerned about housing. Okay, let's do something. So they come up with all these great ideas, and they throw them in the big pile. And then every little special interest starts raising their hand and say, yeah, get rid of that clause, get rid of that clause, get rid of that clause. And so you come up with a bill that doesn't do anything. And we're going to go into some details on the lack of doing. All right, I'm going to prove a negative here, boys. All right, and that whole thing gets clouded out of the news feeds because Trump decides not to sign it, and he's not signing it because of, hey, this doesn't do what I want it to do, so I'm not signing it. No, he didn't sign it to draw attention to something else. Hey, this is something everybody wants, right? I'm not going to sign it because I want you to pass this. 80% of Americans want this bill passed. And for some reason, looking at you, Senate, you won't bring it up for a vote. Oh, I just heard it. Well, actually, what's a female voice? Well, actually, oh, that's bullshit, Ray Dawson. Well, actually, what you hear is like, oh, well, they just can't get it passed because it won't go through a filibuster. All right, let them filibuster it. Swear to God, if I was Senate Majority Leader and was running the Senate right now, every time somebody raised their little paw and said, I invoke the filibuster, like I invoke bankruptcy, I invoke the filibuster, I would say, and the microphone's yours. Really interesting rule about the filibuster is that if you start talking, you can't stop. And you only get to talk once. So it's not like you get to talk and then you yield the floor to your buddy who comes in and he talks and he yields it back to you. No, you got one shot, boy. All right, get up there, grab your copy of the complete works of Shakespeare and start a reading. And when you drop dead, we'll have the vote. That's the way I would do a filibuster. Like, yeah, go for it. All right, everybody stand back, call up the Sergeant at Arms and bring the cots in. All right, wheel a porta potty into the corner. Keep that guy from Maine out of it. He's weird. All right, and just go to town on that. So this particular bit of legislation, and funny thing is that if a president decides he's not going to sign a bill, it automatically goes into effect 11 days later. All right, so you can actually just let it happen. Neutral. I didn't like it enough to sign it. They did their thing. So 21st Century Road to Housing Act was supposed to be the omnibus bill that will help the housing crisis. And they picked the usual bad guys. All right. Now remember, in real estate, there is the actual problem, and then there's the politically expedient narrative of what the real problem is. All right. Now, you turn around and ask people why you're housing so much, a good percentage of them, most of them NPR listeners, all right, will pop up and say it's institutional investors. It's the hedge funds. All right. And I've been right there with it early on. It's like, yeah, institutional investors hold too much property. All right. And they're adding to the demand. I mean, as they add to the demand, okay, they reduce supply, which raises everything up. Well, that was also then, and this is now. Today in America, institutional investors make up 3% of all homeowners. All right, I'm not saying homeowners as they live in a home. I mean people who own a house, okay? So 3%, that is under second homes. Okay, Bernie Sanders owns a higher percentage of houses than your average American does because he's got 3. All right. And he needs 3. Just ask any of his supporters. But an institutional investor, the millionaires and billionaires, are the bad guys. So they go after them because it's politically expedient. Great. Let's shave off 3% of that inventory and put it back on the market. All right. Newsflash. All right. Inventory is not the problem. All right. We'll get to it again. All right. But right here, right now. All right. Right there, the bottom left hand of your side of your screen. 101.8. Inventory is not the problem, boys and girls. All right. And we know it's not the problem because we've been tracking these numbers for the last 2 years. Nobody out there says inventory is a problem, except for people on MSNBC or MS Now or whatever they are calling themselves. All right. It's not an inventory problem. It's a demand problem. How do we fix demand? Well, it is demand's not there because of the price point. The housing is too high. Housing costs are too high. All right. How do we bring down the price of inventory? 3-legged stool. We've already talked about this. Does this impact anything on the 3-legged stool? Let's find out. So from Inman, all right, what the new housing law means for real estate. This is what they have on here. Okay, huge thing about here about how it became law without a signature, because even Inman has to get political. All right, what does it do? It addresses a popular target for both parties, the large investors. Okay, investors who own 350 or more single-family homes are barred from buying additional ones. So you're now capped at 350. That's great, wonderful, awesome. That LLC, you cannot have 350 homes under that LLC. So I create another LLC for $80 called Evil Global Empire 2 LLC, and I buy myself another 350. But you didn't know that. All right, but everybody in Congress knew that. All right, that's not a cap. That's not a cap. Okay, it just means a entity can't hold more than 350. So I create another entity. So, all right. Manufactured housing, I do like this one. One of the problems with manufactured housing is because states still treat them as vehicles, right? Is one of the building requirements for manufactured housing is that it has to be on a steel chassis. Yep, seriously, you have to have a steel chassis. You doing a prefab, you moving it onto a lot, you're slamming it down on, concrete. Still has to have a steel chassis there. Why? Because once a regulation is written, it takes forever to get rid of it. All right, so we just lowered the cost of manufactured housing because now we don't need to use steel, which we're buying from China. All right, to build it on. Right? You can just take the wood, build the flooring, put it right down on the foundation. You're done. All right, so good for that. That's one thing I really like out of this. Oh, by the way, housing policy experts say the change could cut construction costs by $5,000 to $10,000 per home. All right, which doesn't sound like a lot when you're thinking about $500,000 homes, but when you're looking at a prefab model that you can get for under $200, that's like a 2% change, 2.5% change. So that we can use that still for more important things like bomb casings. All right. There is a $2 million grant program to award cities and counties that streamline permitting and zoning rules. Okay, so we touch the zoning, which is one of our biggest problems right now. There's a reason why Austin does not have high home prices, even though the rest of Texas is out of control. Right. Austin's got no zoning laws. Of course, that also means that you can have a strip club opening right next to your daycare center and then put a methadone clinic on the other side of that. But Austin's weird, dude. All right. And expands categorical exclusions from environmental review for smaller infill projects, cutting one of the slower steps in getting a new housing built. The fact that you have to get an environmental review to build a house on an empty field, an empty lot, surrounded by houses, all right, just in case an endangered tortoise decided to go through 17 miles of downtown Phoenix and popped up there. That sounds like a work program for people with college degrees. Just saying. All right, so that's good. All right, that'll help in the infill. And there's a lender law here, raises the multifamily home loan limits for first time in more than 2 decades. I'd like to see what's going on with that. You can use an FHA loan to buy a fourplex. All right, and which I've begged people a million times. Oh, I'm buying my first house so I can, be on this success. I'm like, are you married? No. You have any plans to marry? Well, no time soon. Would you be okay in a 2-bedroom apartment? Oh, I'd be great in a 2-bedroom apartment, but I want a house. All right, let's buy you a fourplex with 4 2-bedrooms. You're going to live in one, rent the other 3 out. If we can structure this right, 2 of them will pay your rent for the rest of your life. The 3rd one's gravy. The 4th one you live in. All right, nice thing is that if your neighbors annoy you, you don't renew their lease. You also don't let them know you're the owner. Otherwise, they'll start knocking on your door when something happens. Also raises a cap on public welfare investments and community development by banks, including affordable housing, from 15% to 20%, freeing up more capital for these projects. All right. community banks, if they have a cap on public welfare investments that is mandated by the federal government, I want to know, why does that exist at all? Just saying. Maybe it's just because they're a higher risk, and then you're putting your bank members, credit union members, you put money into your bank, you're putting their funds at risk. So I don't know. And it directs the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau to study small dollar mortgages under $100,000. Okay, so studying and doing are two completely different things. Studies are where legislature goes to die. All right, so you're going to take 5 or 6 individual people, put them on the study board. They'll meet 3 or 4 times a year, probably at some resort somewhere. Go, hey, yeah. Or there's still a problem. Yep, still a problem. So okay, they find we have discovered that there is still a problem, and they'll send that off to Congress, and that will get filed, and nothing will become of it. All right, so, and then there's some HUD with disaster recovery and rural housing programs. Updated a USDA, which is one of those policies that could just get revamped from the top down. But there's no new money to this. There's no money for the studies. There's no money for the USDA. They're just shuffling paperwork around and stuff like that. So, but more importantly, the whole thing, this is what it doesn't do. All right. All right. Cities and counties can still get control zoning. All right. So NIMBY is still in effect. There was a podcast I was listening to, and they were talking about something unrelated, but they were talking about zoning issues. They were talking about Austin zoning issues. And it's anecdotal, so I don't take this to the bank, all right? But they were saying the number one neighborhoods that are most impactful for the not in my backyard, the people who will come out to city councils and protest the new apartment buildings, also tend to be the deepest blue zip codes. And the ones with the most, in this house, we respect everything except for renters. So I just got to giggle at that. Like pre-COVID, okay. Oh, by the way, did you guys notice I got all the words out and I got to post that video? So awesome. I'm not monetized, but I never will be. The pre-COVID problem, the number one places of people not vaccinating their children were the same zip codes with Whole Foods. It wasn't the zip codes with the Walmarts and the Piggly Wigglies. It was the Whole Foods crowd. So, just an aside there. So, individual zoning, the Whole Foods, in this house we believe crowd are still showing up to city council meetings and saying, no, we don't want apartments. We don't want that new housing development. I literally had many years ago a choir member sit there and go, why is housing so expensive? And I go into my little song and dance, it's like zoning and stuff like that. And it's like every time you try to do, zoning and put in a new complex, people come out of the woodwork and they try to block it. And she goes, well, that's because they keep putting them in houses in stupid places. I'm like, well, tell me more. We are trying to stop this housing development just north of my complex. And she goes into this big song and dance about why this 250 unit housing complex that would house 250 families, that was going to be at a price point for first time buyers, read millennials, and Boomer Betty here is explaining to me why that would just increase traffic in her neighborhood. So when I came to in the VA emergency room, from both my eyeballs rolling out of my head and hitting the floor and rolling across, all right, you're the problem. That's exactly what the problem is. All right. It's like, I want everything to be changed and better, except not in my neighborhood. All right. So cities, counties, they still get to do their thing. Okay. Mortgage rates do not get impacted on this at all. I don't really think there's anything Congress could do about mortgage rates right now, except stop making the money machine go burr. But if it has an effect, all these things, it's not going to be, it went into effect a couple days ago. House prices did not drop 10%. Right. This is a supply-sided bill. This is trying to increase supply, which I'm on board with, but it's just, shuffling deck chairs on the Titanic. A little bit more specific to Arizona this is from Cromford Report. All right. And they come out and say, it's more of what they didn't do. Okay. They're not banning build-to-rent developments, which was one of the things they could have put out there. That's where a builder builds an entire subdivision and sells it to somebody, and then they just turn into a huge rental complex. All right. No requirement for institutional investors to sell their existing properties. Everybody thought that was going to happen. All right, let's make everybody drop to 350. Let's make these people put everything on the market. All right. So they got to get out of the industry. Sell your house. Well, that would not have that much of an impact with only 3% of the inventory. All right, but when we go through the numbers, remind me. All right, we'll do these numbers and then we'll adjust. What happens if we added 3% to this? What happens if we added 3%? All right, see how that fixes everything up. All right. Damn, browser window just opened up, trying to figure out how I'm going to calculate that on the fly. Let's see. My mouth get myself in so much trouble. The no ban on institutional investors buying new builds. Okay, which we covered before. Institutional investor coming in and buying up the last 5 houses in a 150 house subdivision. All right, allows that seller, the builder, to go on to his next project, fully capitalized in the next project. It actually helps for those guys to come in there and pick those things up in an off MLS sale. All right, you living in that subdivision are benefited by them picking up the surplus stuff. It's the exact same economic dynamic as rotisserie chickens in grocery stores. If you don't know what that means, buy me a drink next time you see me at the bar. I will explain it to you. All right. Capitalism. It's awesome. No for sale of build to rent properties after 7 years. There was some talk about, oh yeah, you can do a build to rent, but 7 years later you have to put it on the market. No ban on institutional investors buying and selling to each other. Under some circumstances, institutions are still permitted to buy to renovate and rent. Okay, so that's not a flipper. That's a flip to rent, a buy and hold strategy. Okay. Institutions can buy resale homes if they have established rent-to-own schemes for residents. That is such... Wow. Institutions can buy resale homes if they have established rent-to-own schemes for residents. Okay. We've covered the rent-to-home pipeline. Okay. Rent to own is one of those things that sounds really good on paper, but it's structured in such a way, right? You are going to overpay and possibly lose your down payment. Because I'm going to sign you a lease. All right. You're renting my place. I'm going to give you 2 years. You're putting an extra $5,000 down. Right? If at the end of 2 years, you can afford to buy that house at a price that we're going to agree to, market value in 2 years. All right. Great. I will sell you the house. Well, yay team. If at the end of 2 years you can't, because your credit hasn't improved, the job promotion didn't happen. All right. Whatever happened in those 2 years, I get to keep those 2 years worth of rent and your $5,000 option. And then we're renewing your lease as a permanent tenant, or we're making you go find another place because I'm going to put somebody else in there who has $5,000 and shit credit. I go, oh yeah, rent to own. Give me the $5,000. That purchase is your option. Here's your rent. We're going to, X percentage of this is going to go on. That will go onto your credit. So when we sell you this house, we're going to sell it at fair market price in 2 years, minus the $5,000 you've already given us, and minus the percentage of the rent that you've paid us. 2 years go by. Oh, wait, you still have bad spending habits? Oh, wow, you still didn't get the promotion? So sorry, kid. Off to the next one. All right, so they just, go ahead and do it. Just make sure you have a way to screw your tenants at the end of the day. Awesome. All these provisions are different from what they initially proposed in at least one version of legislation. All right. Institutions stopped buying resale homes a long time ago. They're only 3%. It's not a thing anymore, but my God, it sounds good on a soundbite when you're, you're doing Meet the Press or something. All right. So, other question is, what would have happened if all these houses hit the market? Well, and now we go to the numbers, because numbers this week are recorded on July 15th, 2026. Actives this week were 24,160 active new listings. That is up 93 from the previous week. 9 new listings total were 1,971, up 320. Contracts were 1,914, up 91, and closings were 1,434. Coming soon to an MLS near you is 471 new listings. Supply right now is 101.8, meaning we have about 102 houses for where we should have 100. All right, our demand is at 82.2, and that gives us a comfort report number of 80.7. So, in comparison, we have 24,160 active listings when I ran this thing at 9 o'clock yesterday morning. I want you to do something. Look at the background behind on this. These images that you just sort of gloss over because you hear the music kick in, and next thing you know, you're just looking waiting for the music to end. All right. Look at the bottom left-hand side. All right. Actives, 4,217. All right. That's what our inventory used to be. 4,217. And when it was 4,217, that's when the growth rate of houses, the appreciation was going like this, because we had 4,217. All right. Today, we have 24,160. Okay. We have almost 20,000 more houses for sale today than when I did that first chart that a graphics designer pulled off to do that that graphic. It's not an inventory issue, boys and girls. All right. Now, affordability, all right, that you need to spend more money than you did and than your parents did, all right, to afford that house, because the house prices have gone up so much and the dollar has gone down so little, right? That is an issue. Yes, wages have not kept up with inflation. Going all the way back to 1971. They never have, right? And you forget, for everybody who wants to go back and say, oh, you just want to return us to the 50s and stuff like that and get the women back into the kitchens or whatever like that, is like, no, 1970, something happened in 1970, 71, all right? We had inflation. We got off the gold standards. We were still paying off the debt for the Vietnam War. Things were a little squirrely back then, right? We had problems in the Persian Gulf with Iran. There's blockades and oil issues and this and that and the other thing, right? The world was a hellacious, screwed up place, all right? But at some point, things did not go up the same way. So, what does this mean? Well, once again, we have legislation that does absolutely nothing, goes absolutely nowhere. Okay. They got it done quick enough that all of these politicians can go back, when they're doing their little campaign tours this fall, trying to get reelected, saying, well, I voted yes on the, 21st Century Road to Housing Act, and this is what I'm doing to help you bring down your costs. Yeah. So the politician you need to pay attention to on this, right, is your city council person. All right. It's your mayor. It's your zoning commissioners. It's those people. The people that are the rest of the ballot. Right. And if you are a tenant wanting to buy a house, right, living in Arizona, right, and you keep driving by a big empty lot, say like some of those out there off of Dunlap, okay, really close to Glendale Community College, and it's big and it's empty. It's just sitting there. Well, find out why that isn't zoned for housing. Find out what they're doing there to create lower income housing. Or literally prefer the term starter home housing. All right, housing with a lower price point. See what the city of Glendale is doing for that. See what the city of Peoria is doing for that. Phoenix, we're pretty much landlocked. The only place we can build is north. All right, there's a lot of infill stuff. You guys remember that project they were trying to get down on Baseline, and then the local neighbors got in there, and they went from a 350 unit townhome complex to like 225. All right, so they could have more green space and do some stuff, because there are people, we were worried about traffic congestion. Gladys, you only get on the frickin' car to drive your Buick DeSoto down to Safeway on that special day everybody gets discounts. You don't have to worry about traffic. All right. But anyways, that's where your focus, it's like think globally, act locally. All right. Burrow down. Okay. It's that local news stuff. It's your local politician. All right. You need to watch them just like you're watching your children and pets around the water. All right. Just like you're not driving into anything flooded, right? Just like you're watching for the big sign that says photo enforcement ahead, and then the big gray box on the side of the road, okay, which is the photo enforcement camera. So your husband doesn't realize that you got a photocop ticket because it says defendant, wife of Ray Dawson. So I don't know how people don't notice those things. They literally have a sign up 100 feet before you get to it. Photo enforcement in effect. All right. That means that there's a camera that's going to take a picture of you in about 10 seconds if you were still doing 51 in a 40. I'm so lucky she doesn't watch this. So anyways, and it's monsoon season, so I'm not kidding about the driving anything flooded. All right, work your circles every day now more than ever. If we need to go back to, have the circle class again, we'll have a circle class again, you jerks. And have a great weekend. I'll talk to you guys all later.